Well, welcome to the Edge broadcast, Mark. Hey, tonight we're going to be talking about before Atlantis. And so let's just, before we get going, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience here? You've never been on the show, just who you are and what you do.
Mark Carlotto. I work in the aerospace industry. I have a, PhD in electrical engineering. I've been doing this for like 40 years. And sort of outside of my day job, I've been exploring a lot of sort of edge science.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, alternative archaeology. More recently, before that, I sort of cut my teeth on the face on Mars controversy back in the 80s and 90s.
Hmm.
I've done some UFO analysis. I have a book out on that. Kind of been doing a lot of writing lately, trying to come up with some theories, if you will, for sort of how everything might fit together.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's sort of it in a nutshell. I will probably get into more of it as we talk tonight.
Okay. So you're interested in history, I take it. And so so why did you sort of pick Atlantis as a sort of defining place to start?
Well, it's funny. When I was a kid, I hated history. All I cared about was the space program, and it was all about the future. As you get older, though, you get a different kind of perspective on things, and it just seemed that there's so much about our past that we don't really understand. It used to be that archaeologists believed that our modern human civilization began in Sumer in
Hmm.
Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago. Now it's like 10,000 BC in Turkey, places like Göbekli Tepe,
Hmm.
and it's like we're still sort of like figuring it out. And I had a different, just sort of stumbling upon some interesting facts while I was just planning a vacation and just looking at a lot of imagery from we were going to Mexico and I was looking at sites there and it's like, well, why aren't they aligned in ways that we are generally familiar with, like the pyramids in Egypt lying to the cardinal directions and so forth. Everything was aligned sort of differently, and it got me into thinking about things in a different way. And since then, I've kind of come up with some different hypotheses about sort of how old things are based on their alignments. And that's really what Before Atlantis and my new book Beyond Atlantis is all about.
Hmm. Well, when it comes to history, though, isn't there always somebody that's trying to alter it and rewrite it?
Yeah, I mean, I think history's always been controlled. The history we learn about in school is, that's a version of what happened in the past. But they say that whoever controls history really controls the game. Um, and I think our society wants us to think we're like the greatest thing on earth. But I think if you look at ancient texts and with the research I'm doing, and others, many others, it appears that we may not be the only, but just the most recent advanced technology on Earth.
Hmm.
Anecdotally, we know this is true. There's stuff in Egypt and in South America and other parts of the world we can't figure out. Stones that are so big we can't move them today. Fitted
Hmm.
with such precision, we couldn't manufacture them today. And so, what's the answer to that? Well, a simple answer is it was done by somebody else. And so, yeah, history is. I always thought history was objective, but I think it's very subjective. And I think there's different narratives out there, but they're all open to being tested. We can test them with facts, with data, and that's kind of what I've been doing.
Hmm. Um, it seems to me, and I agree with you, there seems to be some advanced technology. Um, do you think that technology was wiped out or lost, say, after Atlantis sort of disappeared? Or was it a cataclysmic event and then civilization started restarting around the world? How did that go?
So a lot of people are looking for Atlantis as a place. This this image that Plato sort of describes of these concentric sort of rings, this great city, islands within islands, and people are still looking for that. For me, I think Atlantis may be more of a time than a specific place. I think it was a previous civilization that did end around between 10 and 20,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. And I think what we have in Egypt is sort of their legacy. It's their technology that in a sense we've inherited, although we still really haven't quite figured out how it works. But yeah, I think it was a cataclysm. The sort of the theory that's gaining a lot of steam now in mainstream science is that there was an event called the Younger Dryas, which was a period where, if you look at sea levels and global sea levels, and we have data on that for at least for quite some time, for millions of years. The data the last couple 100,000 years is better, more accurate, but it suggests that the amount of water has changed significantly. 20,000 years ago, sea levels were 140 meters lower than they are now, which meant there was a lot more ice. And this was, during the last ice age, and something happened. And one theory is that it was an asteroid or comet that hit the Earth, and basically put an end to the civilization that existed at the time. My theory is a little different, although it doesn't necessarily say that that didn't happen. But I believe that it wasn't just a single event 20,000 years ago, but there's been a series of cataclysmic events, and we've mapped 4 or 5 over the last 100,000 years that are the result of pole shifts. So this is the idea with a pole shift, is that the location of the North Pole actually changes. This is great. You got all the graphics there. Yeah, unfortunately, that one's going to keep moving. But what it shows are different pole locations, and this is from the website beforeatlantis.com, which is my blog, and there's a number of articles there that your listeners can check out. And what this graphic shows is the result of pole shifts, basically shifting what was at the North Pole to a lower latitude. And so when that happens, whatever's at the North Pole, namely ice, will melt. And the theory is that 20,000 years ago, there was a huge ice sheet, the North American Ice Age. We were all under. I live in Massachusetts. We were under a mile of ice here, and the ice sheet extended pretty far south. I think you're in Indianapolis, right? So probably a little bit further south than that, to around where Great Serpent Mound is.
Yeah.
In Ohio, around that latitude, and it's kind of hard to believe. So why was there all that ice? The mainstream theory is that it was because Earth was colder and we were in this global ice age. But another theory that a scientist by the name of Charles Hapgood proposed back in the 50s was that North America had an ice age because we were shifted into the polar region, that the North Pole wasn't located in the Arctic like it is now, but it was located in Hudson Bay in Canada. And if you sort of change your frame of reference and put the North Pole in northern Canada, then all of Canada and much of North America, the northern US, is in the polar zone. So that explains all the ice, because that's where the ice goes, at the poles, the North and South Pole. So the theory is that it's been a series of pole shifts that have occurred, and the last one, about 20,000 years ago, put an end to what we call Atlantis. But I don't necessarily believe that was a specific place or civilization. I think it was a worldwide civilization, and there's evidence throughout the world of of civilizations that all had advanced technology that we really can't explain as stuff that existed at the end of at the late, at the end of the Neolithic, the New Stone Age.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So let,
you know, that,
let me try to figure this out here. I don't know if we're
sure.
kind of so I'm going to be thinking out loud here. Maybe you can help me. Okay,
Okay.
so there's an ice age. United States is covered, and who knows how many other continents are covered. So I would say the moisture then would have to be the oceans evaporating up and coming down in snow. So
Right.
wouldn't that mean there would have been more land mass? And then
Right.
is that am I thinking right?
Yeah, this is a great question. So the amount of ice that can form at the pole depends on how much land is at the pole. If it's all open ocean at the pole, it's harder for ice to form over open water. First of all, it's salt water, and it freezes at a much lower temperature, so it takes a lot for ice to form over water. When if the North Pole were in Hudson Bay, and I don't know if you can go to I probably should have sent you some graphics. My fault. But if you look at the globe and you look at the amount of landmass for a North Pole in Hudson Bay, it's a lot more than the landmass that's currently around the pole. Okay, so in other words, there was a lot more land for that moisture, that snow precip to accumulate over time, and that's why there was so much ice 20,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so much so that the sea levels, have risen 140 meters. That's a football field and a half. That is a lot of water, and that's globally speaking.
So if just theoretically, if all the ice melted on the north and south poles, how much land would be left?
Right. So I mean, that's kind of where we're at now. If you look at global sea levels, we're sort of at the highest that sea level's been for about 100,000 years. So, and there's not much more left, right? There's the Antarctic continent. There's the Greenland ice sheet, which is, you know, well into melting, and um, I'm trying to think. I did that calculation. It's it's not 140 meters. I mean, we're up pretty high. It may be another 20 or 30 meters. I mean, they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about the effect of the glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica melting and flooding, like the east coast of the United States.
So is
So
it
I mean,
some
it doesn't
say
take a
Mark
yeah.
Carlotto? Some people say that Atlantis sank. Others says it was flooded out. Which one do you go for?
Okay, the sinking part is really interesting, because if you take Plato literally, um, you'd have to kind of look at places like the Azores. You'd have to look at the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And some say that the peaks of the Azores are, what's left of Atlantis. But um, the water there is really, really deep. It's thousands of feet deep. So it's not like it's it would have shrank, 100 couple 100 meters and now be below water, but it's like thousands of feet. So, you know, people that believe Atlantis was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean say, well, there was a major change in the Earth's crust, a major, sinking, and other places it rising, uh, you know, by huge amounts. I don't really favor those approaches, because it says that there's a lot. It calls for an explanation that there really isn't a lot of good geology to support. It's kind of speculative.
Mm-hmm.
A better place to put Atlantis, if you believe that it sank, would be um, the Caribbean, so the Bahamas, off the coast of the United States.
Hmm.
because those, you're talking about features now like the Bimini Road, and they discovered some
Right.
pyramids off the coast of Cuba that are not under a lot of water, maybe a couple 100 feet of water.
Hmm.
So those were above water during the last ice
Hmm.
age.
How about those
So
big, gigantic monoliths outside of Japan?
that's right. Those are sort of at a similar depth. Those could have been above water um,
Hmm.
when water levels were 140 meters
Hmm.
lower.
Hmm.
Right,
Now,
right.
is the ocean rising now, or is it basically staying nominal?
Well, I mean, it's rising. Yeah, I mean, it's rising as the climate warms, and
Hmm.
the glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica, as they melt, water levels are coming up
Well,
much
doesn't
more
historically
slowly.
doesn't it show though that there are cycles, warming and then cooling and warming? I mean, couldn't we just simply be in a little bit of a warming cycle? But
Yeah,
in our lifetime, because these cycles, when you meet it out over 1,000 or 10,000 years, we'll never see anything dramatic happen in our lifetime.
that's right. These are not, and that's the thing. It's like if you read Plato and if you take the story of Atlantis literally, this either sinking or whatever you want to call it happened very quickly, but it's unlikely based on the climate data that it did. It was during so over 20,000 years now, water levels have changed 140 meters. That's a long time, and there are certainly periods where it was quicker, but it didn't happen overnight.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was
Right, and
a fairly
there's a whole lot of rich folks that have property on the ocean and on the Atlantic and Pacific, and they don't seem to be very concerned about it. Although, I mean, as far as the ocean rising, although they'll tell the people in the interior the sky is falling, the ocean's going to drown us all. Yet they have ocean views. I don't see them giving it up. So let me
yeah.
ask. We got a question coming in here. And you mentioned pole shift, and we showed your pole shift video. Isn't there uh, a woolly mammoth somewhere that was instantly frozen and had daffodils in his mouth, and it says that was indication of a flash freezing?
Yes, yes. There's a lot of what's been called anecdotal stories like that about discoveries made of mammoths and other animals that appear to have been flash frozen. But there never and there never was a scientific study. A colleague of mine who wrote the book, a related book called what's it called? It is called Deep History and the Ages of Man. His name is Mark Gaffney. He's an environmentalist, and he's done a lot of the climate science work that kind of goes with the ideas that we're talking about here. And he's actually shown he's uncovered some scientific papers that talk about climate changes in places like the UK over the last 100,000 years, where they have these things called bone caves. So they're caves that are sort of isolated, and it's like they're like a little time capsule. And they've discovered fossil remains in a number of these that are impossible to explain using our current climate models. For example, there's one bone cave that has the fossil remains of hyenas and elephants. Now, how do they exist in the UK? These are tropical or subtropical animals.
Mm-hmm.
There's other caves, and this is all in the UK, that contain the fossil remains of the Arctic fox and other mammals that exist in the polar region. How is that possible? Because Britain is in the temperate zone.
Mm-hmm.
So what Mark has shown is that the pole shifts that we talk about in before Atlantis and the dating of those. So now we're at the pole is in the Arctic. Before that, it was in Hudson Bay, I mentioned earlier. Before that, it was in the Norwegian Sea. Before that, it was Greenland, and before that, it was the Bering Sea, north of the Aleutian Islands. And this is over the last 100,000 years. He's correlated these dates with these climate changes and these bone caves, the fossils in Britain. so um, so now we have more than the we have these flash frozen these sort of these anecdotal stories that take on new meaning because they're not just like isolated stories. They make sense. There's actually a scientific theory that says, yeah, this is all consistent with climate changes over this period of time. So it's not like these, a lot of times these things come up and scientists will kind of scratch their heads and it's like kind of like a cutesy story, like on this, in the Sunday morning paper or something like that, just something for entertainment. But this stuff is actually legitimate and cannot be explained using current theories. And so we have a new way of looking at things now that change the reference point, change the where the North Pole is, and all of a sudden now a lot of this sort of anomalous data makes sense. It actually it's consistent with that theory.
All right. We have a viewer that says, Mark, do you believe that the Smithsonian hides evidence of an advanced worldwide civilization?
People have, and I've seen photographic evidence of, you know, um, you've heard stories of giants, right?
Of
These
course. Uh-huh.
giant skeletons
Yep.
found all over the world. I didn't realize they found them on Catalina Island,
Wow.
but in the Southwest and in other parts of the world, in Europe and the Middle East and everywhere.
Mhm.
Anyway, um, I you know I always thought I saw the newspaper articles, but then I started seeing a lot of photographic evidence, and I was talking to some people about it, and they said they had personal experiences about knowing people that actually had done the research, and all this information kind of disappears. They call the local museum, they come over, they check it out, they take it with them, and then they never see the specimens or any of the evidence again.
Hmm.
So you don't hear that once or twice. It seems like it's a systematic effort, and I have to wonder about it.
Hmm.
I'm a little suspicious.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So, yeah, there seems to be accounts of giants all over the world, and you mentioned the
Yeah.
mounds, and who knows how many bones have been dug out of these mounds in the United States. And I bet they've got ground penetrating radar, and they know they're there, and then they just put a sign there that said no trespassing. So because all the others they've took out. But why do you think there's an effort to hide the fact that there were giants?
Well, I think it's part of the effort that is keeping us from really knowing the true age of our civilization well, not of our civilization but of humanity. It's I think and these conspiracy uh theories go beyond archaeology, right? I mean, it's ufology is full of them, and anything that's alternative is it's there's always sort of that uh, group that believes that the government's hiding all this information from us. Um, you know, I don't like to get too spun up over that. I kind of like to I do what I do, and people that are into that do that. But I think it's part of the tendency of scientists to sort of control the paradigm. The paradigm is that we're our civilization began 10,000 years ago, and so that's sort of the that's the party line,
Hmm.
okay? And so that's sort of the box that they create, and they want to keep everything in that box. And anyone that wants to do any research, they got to play in that sandbox. If you want to play outside that sandbox, forget it. You're not going to get any money, and we're not going to publish your papers, and we're not you're not going to be our friend. You're not going to be viewed as a mainstream, as an academic, as a scientist. And so it's created this split between people that just sort of toe the party line, and those that look at the data and say, wait a second, there's all these anomalies that we can't explain. What's going on?
Hmm.
And I think the number of people doing that now, and the number, it's actually, I think it's starting to. I think it's become more of an issue lately because with just the amount of data and the methods and some of these sensing technologies. You
Hmm.
mentioned ground penetrating radar.
Yeah. Well,
You know, we have all these sensors now.
mhm. Well, let me see. You could see the background there. That
And
was my trip to the Mammoth Dig in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and you mentioned about out of place animals. Well, these are
yeah,
woolly mammoths, and within there, and they had on the walls. You can actually see it in the background. There was an elephant, there is a camel, there's a hyena, there's a giraffe. They said all these skeletons are there. Well, that is Hot Springs, Arkansas. Okay, that was the middle of the country right there, and their bones
right.
are. You talk about out of place bones. So that tells me at some point in time there was a, a, a pathway from different continents, or that the Earth was all of one temperature at one time, and all these animals existed everywhere.
So there's this thing called the mammoth steppe. The steppe is like a grassland habitat where mammoths and similar species would graze. There's enough food for them to survive there. Um, if the mammoth steppe right now is sort of there's a little bit in this country, a little bit here, but like it doesn't exist. For example, it doesn't exist in Mexico. Yet they find similar remains in Mexico. How can that be? If you change the point of reference and put the North Pole in Hudson Bay, the mammoth steppe extends from basically northern Europe across through China, Bering Sea, through North America, through this region, and into Mexico. It
Mm-hmm.
forms this. It's right now. It would. It looks on the globe today like sort of like a curve like this. But if you change the point of reference at the North Pole, it's actually a band that exists within the
Mm-hmm.
temperate zone relative to this former pole.
Yeah.
So again,
By the way, I'm sorry. This picture here was sat in South Dakota when we went there. So
yeah,
so obviously there was a land bridge, and
yes, yeah.
that tells me that a lot of the Earth's population also intermingled and was traveling around as well, bringing what they learned on one side of the planet to the other. Is that why we have pyramids all around the Earth at the same time? When if you look at right now, so how could they even communicate with each other back then?
Yeah, not yeah. Pyramids. That structure seems ubiquitous. Why a pyramid? Perhaps because it's a shape that will last forever. But in addition to pyramids, just the materials, the megaliths used. In Lebanon at Baalbek, there's a 1,000-ton stone that was quarried and used, and stones of that size used for the structure at Baalbek that the Romans later built over. But the original structure there, the foundation stones, are 1,000-ton stones. The stones in Peru, in the Sacred Valley in Peru, hundreds of tons, and they were lifted they were moved from quarries across valleys up huge mountains using what the Incas didn't even have the wheel. And these stones were cut. These are the hardest stones. These are like granite and diorite and other really
Mm-hmm.
hard igneous
Mm-hmm.
stones. All these people had were copper and bronze tools. You can't cut stones like that with soft tools like that. So it's like all throughout the world you have these advanced evidence of these advanced technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. There's not only were animals, migrating, but I think we're talking about a worldwide civilization, not just Atlantis. So getting back to what we talked about in the beginning, not just this one place called Atlantis, but a time where of this era 20,000 years ago plus, that there was a previous civilization or civilizations
Mm-hmm.
that were interacting and creating these amazing structures.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Mark Carlotto, I don't know if you saw on our website, we have a poll question for the viewers. We always target our poll questions to the guest topic. And of course, what was before Atlantis is the poll. And the possible answers are ancient aliens, Adam and Eve, only dinosaurs, Martians, another civilization, cavemen, or the Flintstones. Right now, 30% of the people who took that poll said before Atlantis was ancient aliens. 25% said it was Adam and Eve. I see the Flintstones got 3.95%. So we always have kind of a throw an answer in there to throw things off, but it looks like they're getting some votes over there. So, I mean, ancient aliens, man. I mean, I don't know why people vote for that. I guess there is this theory that Martians at one time inhabited the Earth, and they split. They went back to Mars, or the planet was uninhabitable, or so. I don't know what the theory is there, but at some point they say that and then there was your advanced technology from the advanced Martians. I mean, so, but when we're talking about things that we can't actually prove, I think every theory needs to be sort of tested. Okay, well, if that was the case, then this, and then how about that? Ask these peripheral questions to see if those type of theories, no matter how outrageous, because the whole point of this thing is, Mark, we're being lied to. We're being bait and switch. We're being told what to believe and what to think. And, don't look at that big giant skeleton over there. Don't look at that pyramid over there. It was 100,000 slaves with some rope. Well, what about the crystal skulls? Who has the technology today to form a crystal skull out of a pure block of crystal? For one thing, where'd they get it from? Nobody knows that either. But there's no tool marks on those. Now, what kind of technology could do that?
Yeah. So, I your poll question. I'm surprised the Flintstones actually didn't get more.
Well, you got time to vote. You can vote yourself. You can.
That's what I used to think, but anyway, it seems like if it wasn't us, it has to be ancient aliens. But why couldn't it have been a previous civilization or civilizations? In fact, the hypothesis here is that it wasn't just one civilization at the time of Atlantis, but it was a series of them that go back, and they were destroyed. Think about our civilization. If it were destroyed, all of this technology, it's gone. We become hunter-gatherers again. Mm-hmm. We're not gonna keep all this knowledge. I mean, we won't have the means of using it. We're going to be trying to survive, and so over time it'll be forgotten. The memories will be captured or carried down through time in myth and legend and word of mouth. Because if we don't have technology, how are we going to store this stuff? We're going to do it. It's sort of like a global reset. Mm-hmm. So I think it's totally plausible that all this stuff was done by us, by humans, but by civilizations that are lost to history. I mean, I'm not saying that it's true. This is the hypothesis. This is the research that I'm doing to explore. I mean, you could say it's ancient aliens, but it's sort of like I call it like the Deus ex machina. This thing from Greek tragedy or in Greek theater that like the gods would come down to save the day at the end. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, if that's the case, if everything is just magic like this, then why even bother trying to figure it out? It's just okay, it's ancient aliens and we're done. Let's crack a beer and just kick back and screw trying to figure any of it out. But that's. I mean, I'll do that after.
Now
after spending some time, but you want to be able to address it as a scientific question. In other words, to take it apart and say, okay, are there other possibilities? And I think that's what we're trying to do here.
Well, so the Romans had sort of a pantheon of gods, and so did the Greeks. They said the gods came down and helped out man, bringing technology. Of course, the Bible also talks about these things called the Nephilim that came down. Even in something in the book of Enoch, it said that these gods or these spiritual beings or whoever came down and taught men many of the things that they knew. I mean, you got to ask yourself, how did man know that a certain iron ore deep in the earth could form stuff out of it? I mean, was that just when they were sitting around a campfire, caveman? They just slayed eating some woolly mammoth thighs and stuff, and then say, hey, if we go and start digging rock and we heat it up, we can make tools. I mean, it seems like somebody kind of told them what to look for.
Yeah.
So there is that possibility that there was an external force or knowledge that was brought in are brought down to man. Now, in that line of thinking too, as well. So you say you have these Nephilim as far from a biblical sense, but you also
Right.
have giants. There's a book called the Book of Giants, and there's many giants talked about in the Bible. I don't know any other book that talks about them so much other than that. And it also talks about a worldwide flood. So there are three things historically that seem to be, and I know you have, it seemed like you had something of Jerusalem on your website too as well. There
Yeah.
seems historically, from the biblical standpoint, seems to be the knowledge that man had was given to man from an external force. He didn't think of these things on his own, but it seems the most consistent story, it seems to be the biblical narrative.
Right. Okay. So I'm not saying necessarily that we figured this stuff out every time. I believe that there's been these cataclysms, these disillusions, if you want to call them. But we go through these cycles, and that it's happened more than once. I mean, everyone sort of buys into the biblical story of the flood, the biblical floods. But there's flood myths exist throughout the world, and it may not be the same flood. There may have been other floods, other disasters. So the hypothesis is that it's happened multiple times. How we've sort of gotten ourselves back up in back up, whether we've done it or whether there's been another external force, is that's certainly a possibility. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
ruling that out. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
it's happened more than once.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and certainly there seemed to be a flood of some sort that happened worldwide, because we talk about the structures off Japan and the Bimini Road, and who knows what's they continue to find even Roman goddesses and such in the water. So we know at some point, unless they were taking 100-ton statues on a boat, a rickety old boat,
Yeah.
in the year 200, and dumping them out in the ocean. I'm not sure they could do that, or they would do that. But there are these stories of this worldwide type of flood scenario. What is
Right.
mainstream science? Do they agree that these civilization historic stories indicate from all over the world that there was at least a major flood, if not secondary and third type floods as well?
Yeah, and there some of these myths have been explored, like in Central Asia. There's a myth of a flood by the Zoroastrian religion, and that actually appears to be correlated with events that took place after the last ice age, where the water levels started rising, and water began to surge through the Bosphorus in the Eastern Mediterranean, and through a cascade of basins, it made its way into Central Asia, which it's an area that's all desert now, but it was different, thousands of years ago. And anyway, there's some basis for that flood being the motivation or the inspiration of the Zoroastrian flood myth. There's been similar research done in Mesopotamia. In some of the excavations there, they found evidence of
Mm-hmm.
seashells and other things
Yeah.
that would correlate with the
And
flooding in
isn't that true though?
Mesopotamia.
And this is something I have found. I don't
Yeah,
know. On my hiking experience, I don't know. It seems like I have found seashells on every mountain that I've ever climbed.
yeah.
Now, you mentioned myths. How many stories does it take worldwide? Because the last account I heard, there's at least 137 civilizations that claim of a worldwide flood, cataclysmic flood. And I don't know that we can put it in the myth category. Now, the specific details could be argued, but when you have that sort of documentation and historical record, because who's to say it's not a historical record? I mean, it's gotten from ancient documents and tablets and every other kind of method that they kept track. So how can we keep that? How do we keep that in a myth category? Should it just be not a myth, but more the details need to be examined further?
Yeah, so archaeologists have to find some fossil remains, some artifacts of an advanced civilization that's at a level in the ground that they can, based on stratification, they
Mm-hmm.
can date to that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that whether that information's been uncovered but is suppressed, or whether, like you were suggesting, or whether it hasn't been found yet, whether the smoking gun, so to speak, hasn't been
Mm-hmm.
found yet, is also another possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Not being someone that can dig in the ground, I saw it another avenue, which is, if you look at these sites, and everyone's got Google Earth and Google Maps, you can go anywhere in the world. You can look at Temple Mount in Jerusalem. You can look at the Parthenon. You can look at Machu Picchu, and you can look at all these sites, and they're not aligned to the cardinal directions. So, getting back to what I've done is I've correlated these alignments where the North Pole hypothetically was, over the last 100,000 years. I mentioned 4 pole locations. It turns out that those 4 pole locations, if you view those as reference points,
Mm-hmm.
and in the same way that today we line things north, south, east, and west. If the North Pole was in a different place, and they were in, previous civilizations did the same thing, these sites would not be aligned north, south, east, and west today, but they would point to these previous poles. I have found 500 sites throughout the world that point to these previous poles.
Mm-hmm.
And what's, I think, significant about it is that a very simple idea that the pole has moved 4 places explains all of these sites in a way that archaeologists cannot explain. For many of these sites, they say, well, they're sort of aligned to the sun, but not precisely, or they are aligned based on local practices, or some date. They say it's very ad hoc, I guess, would be the term I would use. And so, the hallmark of a good theory in science is that it explains a lot with very few facts. So I'm not, I don't want to use ancient aliens. I don't want to use all these specialized ad hoc explanations. Mm-hmm. Just a simple theory can explain a lot. And that theory takes you back 100,000 years to not just one flood, one cataclysm, but a series of them. Mm-hmm. So just sort of tying it together, I think this takes it out of the realm of myth, like you were suggesting, and it should be science. It should be an area that's investigated in science today, but it's not, because mm-hmm. Because it's outside the box.
Yeah. Well, Mark Carlotto, I asked you earlier and in the beginning, the first hour, what would be the reasoning for trying to rewrite history or hide history from us? There's so many stories of giants. I mean, there's somebody who's got a whole website of early American articles of early Americans finding giants. Maybe, I think even Abraham Lincoln saw one of the skeletons somewhere.
Yeah.
But there is, but I'm gonna propose a reason. And I mentioned a couple of the biblical narratives: the giants, the flood, the Nephilim coming down and giving, or the gods of some sort, sons of gods, giving man information. Those all go along to a sort of another narrative which exists. And of course, we're talking about the flood here, or a major flood, and given that I'm sure there were other floods as well. But there, how about this? That you tie this into your pole shift, and tie this into the graphic that I showed you of the mammoth bones that had other animals in it that they should be in the other side of the planet. And then I suggested that it was probable that the Earth was at one temperature at one time, and all these animals existed simultaneously, which would indicate to me that at some point the Earth was like enveloped in some sort of vapor canopy, and all the Earth, the moisture in the Earth was all the same. The temperature, as sort of like in a terrarium sense, held that you had palm trees in the desert, and that's where you find the oil, because obviously a tremendous amount of animal and plant activity caused that to be there. So sometimes the deserts around the world had fauna galore. But so this terrarium type of thing, now going to your pole shift, the Earth tilted and broke that canopy. That canopy broke, and that moisture that was in the atmosphere came down, and that was formed at least the major cataclysmic flood on the Earth, and that's why. And that's when the poles then instantly froze on top and bottom because the poles shifted, and the terrarium part of it, the moisture barrier, broke apart, and it came down in that. What do you think about that?
Well, it's not the theory that I'm proposing, but I mean it's possible. I mean anything is possible. Um, I don't know. Does it? I'd have to think about. Does it violate any of the laws of physics, right? Because anything. I mean, look, we exist we exist in the physical world, so it's gotta make sense, right?
Mm.
So could you have a whole planet at a constant temperature? Um, maybe if you were inside of something like a Dyson sphere or something like
Mm.
that, where
Or
they
well,
talk
like I
about
said,
building.
well, like I suggested, the this vapor barrier would do it. A
Yeah,
suspended.
I don't, I don't know. I'm an
We'll
electrical
think about
engineer,
that.
not a climate scientist, although I play one on TV. Uh, I mean, Daniel, in order to do what I'm doing, I have to kind of not, I have to be able to wear a lot of different hats and be able to sort of co-opt and sort of take information from different domains and try to correlate it and put it together. So I'm not an expert in any of these. It's tricky being a generalist because you're on shaky ground. You're on thin ice often. But like I said, it's when things kind of hold together with when a simple explanation explains a lot. And I mean that's a simple explanation as well. I just don't know if it's something that is physically if it would work if
Hmm.
the physics would work,
Hmm.
but it's possible. I mean,
Okay. All right. All
I
right.
don't know.
At least we have you in the possible realm there. You haven't dismissed that out of hand completely. So there.
Anything is, I think in my book, a lot of things are possible. Um, and I think, okay, is this possible? Yeah, it's possible. Is it probable? It may not be probable. And even this, this pole shift idea is so many people say it's nonsense. It's fake science. It's total nonsense. And so you'd have to be totally insensitive not to take it to heart and say, is this stuff really crazy? What am I
Mhm.
doing here? But when
But
you
is
look at the data
but there
and it
isn't there
doesn't, when you
is
look at the data and it explains so much, it's like
yeah,
it, it if it's impossible, then why is it the only explanation? At
right.
least the only one I've
But
come across.
it is another supportive fact on that would be, of course, as I suggested, the deserts at some point had massive amounts of greenery and
Right.
animal activity. But let me go to we've got a lot of questions coming in, so let's get to our
Okay.
audience here for you, Mark. Doug from Virginia says, "Do you know of the fossilized human footprints in Red Rose, Texas?"
Yeah. So I don't know of them by name, but I'm familiar with a lot of these footprints that were preserved from um, thousands. And I think in South America there's some that go back like many tens of thousands of years. Um, but the southern U.S. is very interesting. When I wrote Beyond Atlantis, when I first started off before Atlantis, I was looking at sites like Egypt and in the Middle East and South America, and I hadn't even considered the United States because I figured, well, it was under an ice sheet. What are we going to find in the United States? Well, it turns out the ice sheet only went as far. We talked about this earlier as like Great Serpent Mountain, Ohio. So the southern U.S., Texas, was not under ice during the Ice Age, and I've heard these stories about these evidence of modern man tens of thousands of years ago. There's also a place called I think I have it here. Have you ever heard of this place called Rockwall, Texas?
No. Oh wait, yeah. I did hear about that. It's a wall that was built maybe for miles.
This is really cool. It was discovered in the 1800s, and this is northeast of Dallas. And this whole area has been totally developed. I think they're really literally trying to cover this thing up. But there were excavations, and it's really hard to find out much about this. But it appears that there was a massive structure, um, miles in size, that was, and they had excavated sections of it in the 1800s into the 1900s. You can't see any of it from the air now. It's all buried. But this structure, they geologists say it's natural, but it has, when you have blocks like this, and this is a reconstruction, and the joints, if the joints go straight down,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's likely natural. But if they're offset, like in brickwork, that's generally taken as it being an artificial man-made structure.
Yeah.
And that's what this wall evidently looks
Mm-hmm.
like, the sections that have been excavated. And this structure, talking about alignments, well, this structure is aligned to the Hudson Bay Pole.
Mm-hmm.
So what I believe, when this wall was built 20 plus thousand years ago, the North Pole was in Hudson Bay, northern U.S. was under Ice Age. Texas was in the northern temperate zone, so it would have had the climate like North Dakota, Minnesota, any of the northern tier states.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no ice there, and people lived there, and this enormous structure was built, and it's buried in the ground, and it's aligned in this direction, the same direction that hundreds of other sites throughout the world are aligned. They all
Well,
point to this Hudson Bay Pole.
and thank you for that. My earlier uh, overall tying a lot of things you said into the biblical narrative end of it, and my initiation to that was to say a reason of why history is trying to be hid, because those things, the giants, the flood, the pole shift, all are in that biblical narrative, which the system, the government, that's not part of the educational establishment, they do not want to support that. They don't want any facts ever to support that. So they'll come up with any kind of strange formula to suggest why these things seem to be true, that the earth was in a sort of a vapor canopy of in a terrarium, that there was a tilt and the flood, and then it was a flood, and it was worldwide, and technology came down. They don't want that narrative out there. I mean,
No.
we just discussed that all narratives need to be examined. That happens to be one that is so taboo that they'll say a freaking alien came down and they was doing some building work down here. Anything, maybe it was some midgets or something. Anybody, anything other than a biblical narrative. All right, let's get back to some questions for you here. Here we go. Put Yahweh first. Says Mark, have you heard of the 7 sleepers in Ephesus, Turkey? It was on Ancient Aliens History Channel just now.
Uh, 7 sleepers. I know the 7 sages, and there's, it's sort of like the Apkallu, and you were talking about them earlier, the Nephilim, and all these beings that seem to have some role in our guiding our destiny. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But in Turkey, I'm not familiar with that. No,
Okay.
and I'll have to check that out.
Okay, here we go. This is from Curious, says Mark. Any info on Lumeria? It was a rival civilization to Atlantis.
So there was a 19th century French archaeologist. He was actually a photographer, and he spent years in Mexico. His name was Augustus Le Plagion, and he has his own translations of a lot of the Mayan codices, and his translation suggested that there was that Atlantis, and he believed Atlantis was actually in Mesoamerica, is in the Yucatan. In other words, the Mayans were the survivors of Atlantis, but that was actually part of a larger civilization that he called Mu, that was popularized by James Churchill, and so the idea is that, again, it wasn't just limited to one place, but it was a much larger civilization. Um, again, with sort of Plato, saying Atlantis was in the middle Atlantic. Well, the Azores are all that's there, and it doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence. There's not a lot of evidence for Lemuria, for Mu in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. However, if a lot of the islands there have ancient structures that are similarly aligned to these ancient poles I talk about. So it's possible that Lemuria was not a single landmass, but was instead of like a vast archipelago of islands much larger than they are today because sea levels were lower, but islands nonetheless throughout the Pacific. And it's possible that there was a an ice age civilization that existed at that time in the Pacific Ocean. It's actually an article on my blog that talks about that, the possibility, and has some maps and shows some of these sites.
Okay.
You can check it out.
All right. This is from Rose.
Yeah.
Rose says, what do you know about the Tartarian Empire that supposedly existed before us? They say they built buildings on top of Tartaria to cover it up.
So this whole idea of now is this the one? Is the Tartarians the ones? The survivor, the ruins are in Spain. Is that the one?
I'm not sure about that.
So this whole idea of building over things. This is actually a key idea. So I'm not saying that any of these sites that are aligned to these poles are. I'm not saying that like. Pick a site like Teotihuacan, north of Mexico City. I've been there. It's not 40,000 years old. I believe it was built over something earlier. If you go to Rome, Rome was built. Structures in Rome were built on tops of the roofs of previous structures there. The Parthenon in Athens is built over an earlier Parthenon, and we build over things. And so the idea is called adaptive reuse. So I don't think necessarily that anyone was trying to disguise what they're doing. It's just sort of a natural process that when you move in, you take what's there, and you're not going to pour new foundations. It's like just let's use what's there and build over. It's easier. New York City is another example. So it's a worldwide practice, and that's really, I think, New
Orleans. New Orleans is a good example.
Yeah, I mean, it's in some places it's sinking, right? So, but presumably it's
Mark,
down there.
Have you ever heard of mud fossils?
I don't know.
Okay, that'd be a good search for you. Take a look at that.
But fossils.
There is this. People have said that the Devil's Tower rock out west is actually a gigantic petrified stump of a tree. And if that's true, because they said there's rings and everything on the top of it, and it's just sitting out there, it's called the Devil's Tower. Some people, and that would be sort of the mud fossil thing that these giants that existed. And there's figurines that can be seen aerially looking down. I know there's one of a elephant. There's one of a woman. There's one of several faces, as if they were these enormous giants that may have been covered in mud. Again, back to the giant flood that covered the earth, and they were covered in mud, and then they sort of became petrified. All right, let's get to a few more questions. Grumpy says, Mark, should the poles flip? What would that mean to humans? If it flips again, what does that mean to humans?
So, so the poles flipping, that's the whole, the idea there is the magnetic poles. In other words, if the magnetic pole flipped, your compass, instead of pointing north, points the other way. Mm-hmm. The North Pole becomes the South and vice versa. This happens, and they're not sure why. But there's evidence, and I talk about this there's an article on the blog that's correlated, that event is actually correlated with what's called supervolcanic events. So when that happens, you get massive volcanoes going off and spewing gas and basically creating nuclear winter kinds of scenarios where the temperature drops on Earth and all that for many years. Um, these appear to be correlated with pole shifts. So if another one happens, it's possible that it could be followed by a pole shift. And how, I don't know as if we have the time to really get into that now. I could spend a few minutes, but let me just say this: the model I have is that the Earth is we have this magnetic field that comes from the core of the Earth, the molten core, and the crust of the Earth sits on the mantle, and it can move. The plates, the plate tectonics, they move around. The continents move around. The theory in crustal displacement is that the whole crust can actually shift. It doesn't, but it can't normally do that because it's too big and it's just there's not enough force. Mm-hmm. So the hypothesis is that when a geomagnetic reversal occurs, when the magnetic pole flips, the magnetism of the crust is opposite from the core, and it's sort of like you put two north poles together, they repel. And so the whole crust, when that happens, can move. And the hypothesis is that the moon, the same way it pulls the oceans, starts to pull on the Earth, on the land, and causes the crust of the Earth to shift. And so if this were to happen, there's a possibility, if this is true, that it could create a crustal displacement, and it would be one of these, once in every like 20 to 30,000 year events that are sort of like a global reset. It's a global cataclysm, volcanic eruptions, floods, and all the stuff of biblical proportions, right? So it could be a big deal.
Mm-hmm. All right, Life Station Express says, Mark, was Atlantis before or after Adam and Eve?
Well, if there are these global resets, and someone is helping us out, as you suggest, maybe the Adam and Eve story isn't a once it happens once, but perhaps it happens periodically. So I think it's all the stuff is cyclical.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying that then everybody got wiped out, including Adam and Eve, and then Adam and Eve restarted it, but they'd have to get here somehow, wouldn't they?
I don't know. These questions are beyond my pay grade. I can just go, I go so far. And then it's, I'm honest with you. It's speculation. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Curious, ask this question, Mark. Do you agree or know about the history of Atlantis spoken of in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth?
Oh yeah, I've heard of them, and I don't think I really know enough to. I've heard of them, but I really don't know enough to say anything more. Yeah.
Just say I can't answer that.
I can't answer that. I see there's some interesting texts, ancient Egyptian texts that talk about the founders of the Egyptian civilization coming from the West, and a lot of these, I think this is tied in with that. Mm-hmm. So they are pre-dynastic, really early, the origin of the Egyptian civilization, tens of thousands of years ago.
Mm-hmm. All right. Doug in Virginia says, have you heard of the ancient artifacts inside rocks being found in coal mines and digging wells? A steel hammer was found with steel purer than anything we can make now.
Yeah. So these are these out of place artifacts that they have been finding throughout the world. That again, you can't explain them in terms of, they're so deep that they predate the industrial age, just to be specific, right? So how did they get there? So yeah, there's a lot of them, and the idea that there's been previous civilizations, just simply if you buy that as a possibility, then these out of place artifacts are the artifacts from these previous civilizations, because they were more advanced. They got buried, and now they're down there, and we find them and they're deep because they're old.
All right.
And yeah,
Okay. How about this one here? I don't think we've gone down enough rabbit holes. So let's go down this one. Are there people that live in the inner earth as if they escaped some of these catastrophes on terrestrial land and they went in earth? Could there possibly be people living down there?
one of my favorite stories is Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, it's like you get this. A lot of people are believe this and believe that's where the alien bases are, that they're underground. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff underground that we don't understand. So yeah, I don't know. There could be something underground.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I
Some
don't. I don't
something
think
or
that. I don't
some
think. I
something or
don't think.
someone.
I don't think the Earth is hollow. I mean, I think it's possible that there are, vast subterranean areas. They're talking about these subterranean areas on the Moon and on Mars as being, really good places to build habitats.
Mm-hmm.
You have similar structures on Earth. They're called lava tubes, where, you and you can certainly create, you can manufacture, excavate areas. We know the government, and we know that civilizations have done this. There are caves in Turkey um, that go down hundreds of feet that
Mm-hmm.
held thousands of people,
Yeah.
and so I mean this, and it's not an exception. They're all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
And I always wondered because I knew about those. How did I mean? You can't carry a torch from up there to way the hell down in there. Seems to me they had some sort of artificial lighting, maybe a battery. I mean, there is those Egyptian hieroglyphs that showed uh, like a
Yeah,
light bulb, like they
yeah.
figured out a battery in a light bulb.
Yeah, and you wonder, yeah, if you had fires going for cooking, maybe they were very well ventilated, but there's a lot of carbon monoxide. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if we tried to build something like that, we'd probably screw it up and we'd end up killing thousands of people. But yet, I mean, I don't know. They seem to have figured it out
Let's
by some means.
let me ask you this question here. So I think we are in agreement that history is being hid. The true Earth history is being hid for one reason. I posited a very good explanation earlier. You've had a few yourself.
Mhm.
But if that's the case, in such a large scale of lying and deception, bait and switch, and who knows what, can you think of another topic that is on that scale besides the revisionist history of the Earth and ancient civilizations, Atlantis included? As you know, they will put it in the myth category, and just go back to caveman to a city, to New York City, that type of thing. Those kind of quick jumps and with nothing in between and nothing before, nothing after. Can you think of another topic that is on that scale of deception?
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, because I kind of came. I mean, I was what I'm doing here is fairly recent. Years ago in the 90s and the 80s, I was doing UFO research, and I think the whole UFO phenomenon is a prime example. And what I think all these have in common is um, there is a community that has that sort of regarded as the experts. It could be the powers that be, the governments of the world, or the scientists, the scientific organizations. And if they don't have the answer, if they don't know, that's sort of a bad thing. I think it's okay not to know, but maybe it's human ego, something fundamental in our nature, at least as groups or as organizations. Organizations have to know. And if they don't know something, I think they may change the narrative to suit their purposes. So if
Okay.
science can't explain these anomalies, they just say, well, they don't exist.
Right, and I think I heard somebody put it this way, and you maybe heard it explained this way. It's sort of, and I may get this wrong. It's something like what the government doesn't um, control doesn't exist. Then that would be information. If they can't control
Yeah,
that information doesn't exist. They only want what they can control. Nothing else matters to them.
I think that there's a certain amount of truth in that. I don't necessarily see it as being nefarious. I think oftentimes people, if you can't tell people that everything's okay, then they become people. A lot of people become fearful in the face of the unknown, and a lot of people want to know when they go to bed at night. They want to know. They want there to be some certainty,
Mm.
and that's what governments provide, right? They provide certainty, they provide security. And if you can't provide that, if like with the UFOs threat, if they were to say, we don't know what's going on here, then people are going to panic. So I think they act like they know what's going on, but I don't think they really know what's going on.
Well, it seems to me that this UFO story is breaking free from being sort of sequestered. That's another one of those topics. They can't control the narrative, so they say it didn't exist. Now it's beyond their ability. Now they're trying to jump in, and of course, there's the Tic Tac videos, and which is like years
Yeah.
later. They had them for years, sitting on them for years. This is kind of the crap that we got to deal with. Why do we need to wait on them to say whether something exists or is true or not? But it seems to me that narrative of the UFO is getting out there, and they're being forced to address it now.
Yeah, I mean, they're addressing it. They're not saying that they know what it is. I mean, it's clear that I don't know if the truth is out there. That the 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 data is out there, the information is out there, the videos, the reports. I mean, everything that Project Blue Book and all these other organizations have been collecting. All this stuff now in light of these disclosure statements, it's all legitimate stuff now. But there's no truth. They don't know what it is, and people keep saying, well, the government knows, they're just not telling us. I don't think the government knows, and so that's why I think it might be good to sort of like just you know step back a little bit and not get so spun up over this and say, hey, look, we got with the UFO phenomenon and with ancient mysteries, we have things that we don't understand. Let's just try to study them and see what we can learn about them, rather than getting into this narrative that they're not telling us, they're keeping the truth from us. Maybe they just don't know. Maybe we just need to like be a little bit more humble, realize that we don't know all the answers, and maybe try to figure them out. As I mean, because humans are curious. We want that's why we went
Mm-hmm.
to the moon, because we're
Mm-hmm.
curious. So
Right.
let's in that spirit, let's do it. And that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I know. No, you mentioned the truth. Jesus made the unbelievable claim and said that he said, "I am the truth." And I guess if one was to know Jesus, they would know the truth, and then all these other peripheral questions may kind of just fade away. But there is truth out there, and I think that we can find it
Yeah.
if we look for it. We have to look for it in places that are just normally left aside, especially if somebody says don't look. And now maybe you can help me out here. Is 90% of the Grand Canyon off limits? There's a huge amount of it. There's no trust. You can't go there. And some people say it's because there's so many Egyptian artifacts there. And if you go look around the Grand Canyon, there's a lot of Egyptian names to all different sorts of places. Is the evidence in plain sight, and they're just forbidding us to go over there?
I've asked about that, and I've actually asked some pretty sort of open-minded, like archaeologist types about it, and they said there's really no. It's just a wives' tale. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've seen those stories about was it a cave, or it was some opening discovered, and they found all kinds of Egyptian artifacts and stuff. Um, but I don't know. I mean, it's in as
We
far
are
as I know,
talking
it's
about the
hearsay.
government. We are talking about the government here, and we know
Yeah,
if they
I
were
don't know.
liars, we mentioned Jesus is the truth. Well, the government is a liar, and the father of it. I mean, everything that we're being told by the government is a lie. I mean, we have to really, Mark, you and I, and the people watching the show, we got to like fight out of this sort of matrix goo, because they're pumping. It's like the society pumps these lies and deceptions and mistruths into us. But we got to fight our way out, fight our way out. And I think you're trying to fight your way out by researching into ancient civilizations.
Yeah, and I think we can all do that just by being critical thinkers, not taking everything for granted. I say believe everything and believe nothing. So I think there might be a grain of truth in a lot of stuff that we might at first blush sort of discount, but you sort of consider it, and then but you don't believe it, and you look for your own answers. And just because someone says something, you don't always you shouldn't have to accept it. You have to. There's a lack of critical thinking in our society, and I think it would be a good thing if we were to do more of it, because that would be the freedom. That's the way of getting out of this mess.
This matrix goo and these lies.
This goo, yeah. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, man. In fact, here, let me just go ahead and get us in the matrix here. All right, you and I in the matrix now. All right, so hey, let's check our poll here, Mark Carlotto. And of course, the poll question on the website for those watching the program. You can take the poll now. We've got a few more minutes left. What was before Atlantis? Your choices are only dinosaurs, another civilizations, Adam and Eve, cavemen, ancient aliens, Martians, or the Flintstones. And Mark, I know you're rooting for the Flintstones. Let's check it. Hit that poll result. Boom. Hey, I think Flintstone's coming up, but we're still we're still at ancient aliens, man. Before I guess the aliens inhabited the earth, and then the civilizations came, or maybe who knows? I'm not sure how that kind of goes there. So, hey, I'll tell you what though, your books in your website. Tell me about that. What's in them? What's on your website?
So my books are self-published. They're available on Amazon. They're available print and Kindle. Although a lot of people have problems with the Kindle edition because these are my latest book. It's kind of a big book. It's got a lot of figures and graphics, and it's hard to do a Kindle version of that. But I mean, if you have a big tablet, you can read it no problem. So anyway, they're available on Amazon. All of my books are available on Amazon. If you go to beforeatlantis.com, that's kind of the blog and website that I'm sort of into right now, and that's where the ancient mysteries work that I'm doing now. And there's links to get to other content that I have.
Now, what's the difference? What's the difference between the book in our background and the other book that we had there?
Okay, so Before Atlantis was what I published this in 2018, and this really presents sort of the initial evidence that, hey, look, there's a lot of sites on the planet that seem to point to these pole locations, but there wasn't a whole lot of context. So what I do in Beyond Atlantis is I tie in the what we discovered in these different parts of the world, and it's actually amplified quite a bit. There were 100, 200 sites discussed in Before Atlantis, and now it's up to 800 sites. Based on continued research. And what I do in Beyond Atlantis is I tie it in with the civilizations, the sort of the lost civilizations in those parts of the world. So I have kind of a context for saying there's these early civilizations. They don't really know where they started, how they originated, but if you buy into this pole shift idea, there was evidence that there was a previous civilization in this part of the world, and this later civilization, this lost civilization, are their descendants. So I'm trying to establish kind of like a historical kind of context so that the stuff isn't just, just sort of out there, but it actually, you can tie it in with world history, with world ancient history, with the Greeks, with the Romans, with, the Sumerians, and Chinese, everyone. There's 20 chapters, and I talk about sites all over the world.
Interesting.
So it's very extensive.
So I know how we were talking about testing different theories earlier in the first hour. Okay, well, this, and we said, well, no matter how different it is from our current world view, and from everything that you said in the last hour and a half, Mark, none of it seems to be against sort of the biblical narrative. I think, and I love ancient civilizations. I think ancient civilizations go hand in hand with that. So I think they'll work together. I think it needs to be on the table. Well, Mark, we're right at the end of the broadcast. I appreciate you coming on. And then let me ask you something though. In your books, are there pictures and discussions of a lot of ancient civilizations? Because
Oh
I'm a
yeah.
picture guy myself.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. There's tons of
Okay.
pictures.
Oh, good. Love that.
Yeah. I mean that I'm a visual guy, and there's a chapter on the Middle East, on Jerusalem and Baalbek and places
Mhm.
like that in that part of the world. And some of the research I cite, the early research was done by biblical scholars in the 1800s and 1900s.
Mm.
And so they were going to these sites to try to understand how the biblical stories sort of fit into an archaeological context. And so I that's the starting point for me. That's where
Nice.
I in these chapters, that's where I go. That's where I start.
Nice.
So
Nice. All right. Well, Mark Carlotto, I appreciate you coming on the Edge broadcast. How do you like the interview style we have? Because I know you've been on a lot of shows.
it's great. I really enjoy talking with you. It just I can't believe it's almost 10 o'clock. The time just sort of flew by.
Yeah, it was a lot of
It's
fun.
good. Thanks very much for having me. I much appreciate it.
Okay, Mark, and thank you.
Thank you.